Hey, another day and another reporting of IgG4 antibodies post mRNA vaccination. This is now a 10th publication, so 1-0 that I'm going to be reporting on in terms of presenting development of these unusual antibodies post mRNA vaccination only. And before I give you a quick summary, because I'm going to start the video with the summary. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Mikola Vrashek of Genomics, and I've been, for any of you who've been following me, obviously you would know that I'm following the IgG4 development story religiously. I've been presenting every single paper I've been able to find on this topic so far, and as I mentioned, this is now the 10th one. And this quick summary, and this is the first paper. That was the first paper I came across that presented information post 4 mRNA vaccinations, so 2 boosters. Now I can tell you there's one more paper that I'll be presenting on in another video that claims they thought they were the first ones, but this is the first one I came across, so I'm filming on it first. But there's at least one more video coming up. And basically the summary is that these IgG4 antibodies remain elevated as individuals continue to be boosted with the mRNA vaccines. This paper also showed, it's now the third paper to show that people who are non-vaccinated but who had COVID-19, so they were infected by the virus, they do not present these antibodies at all. And what's also very neat about this paper that the authors, because of the amount of data they were able to have, they were able to also were the first ones to make a statement that they don't believe that formation of these antibodies increases the likelihood of breakthrough infection. So the authors did not think that these antibodies can provoke those who have them of being more likely to be infected. So that's very positive news, obviously. Behind me, you see this cool waterfall. Never climbed it, I don't think. But behind the waterfall is a big lake, and behind the lake is a giant glacier that leads to ice field. I tried to film there before, but it was too windy, and I decided to stop filming in glaciers areas that are so windy. I have a couple videos you can check out what I mean when it comes to windiness factor, and a couple videos around glaciers that are non-windy. So check those out if you're interested in what glaciers look like up close, I suppose. And but hopefully I'll be able to get up there one day and film when it's not windy. Not today, because the party we're with is not up to the task. Obviously, I don't mean myself. Wink, wink. You can't see the wink, but there was a wink. All right, let's continue with the science. What's also neat about this paper is that this is a second one that had a very large group of people. They studied about 370 individuals. And by the way, this paper is from Japan. So we're seeing now this documented all over the world, basically. So basically the take-home message is that if you are mRNA vaccinated, and unless there's some other incidents taking place, it appears that everyone seems to be developing these unusual IgG4 antibodies. So basically what did they do is they collected the blood samples of these individuals after second, third, fourth vaccination, and they 1 month after, 3 months after, and approximately 6 months after third and fourth vaccination. So then they had a very nice time spread that allowed them to study this, and they looked for all IgG subtypes. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4, and basically we're going to focus on number 4. And you can see basically, and what's really cool is that they measured the seropositivity, which basically means how many of those individuals that they were testing were showing up with these IgG4 antibodies. And what's interesting that prior to vaccine, they were able to detect IgG4 antibodies in about 4% of the population. They did not, of the cohort that they studied, they did not mention whether any of those individuals were afflicted with IgG4 related disease. There's a bunch of skiers behind me coming right up. But these are very low levels. They just simply, this is what the test allowed them to detect. Now, they were able to show that very soon after second shot, so after 2 shots of the mRNA vaccines, and I believe that the primary vaccines were Pfizer, and boosters were either Pfizer or Moderna. And basically, let's go for a little walk. And basically, after this 1 month after the second shot, there was already starting an increase in IgG4 antibodies. So about almost 7% of the population were now showing IgG4 antibodies. This increased to about 50% of the population that they were studying were showing IgG4 antibodies after the second shot 6 months later. So it only takes 2 mRNA shots for these IgG4 antibodies to start showing up, and they just simply take time. And then after third shot, after 1 month after third shot, pretty much everyone is showing it. 97 to 98% of the population is showing it, and that remains elevated at around these levels after third and fourth shot as well. So that's the data. So you can see the trend as the antibodies are slowly rising after the second shot, and after the third shot they slowly decrease, but it's still highly increased, and then that gets reboosted with the fourth shot, and then they remain elevated. They don't have long-term data after 4 shots as well. And this brings me to another paper, because this increase after 1 month after the second shot, that has actually been reported before, but I've never actually reported myself. So there was one paper from 2021 that actually looked at the IgG subtypes, and they reported on all 4 subtypes as well, except it was a very short duration study. It was only 5 weeks long, and from the first shot to when they were measuring it. And so basically they had data only 2 weeks after the second mRNA shot. I believe it was also Pfizer. And even after 2 weeks, that paper reported a small increase in IgG4 levels in their study group. So I never reported it until now, because here now we have a second paper showing that this increase in IgG4 antibodies can happen really quick. Maybe not in many people, but it can happen immediately post second shot, and then increases much more rapidly after third shot. So now this is how we get now 10 papers in total reporting on IgG4 increase post mRNA vaccines. If you're following my table, because I'm obviously showing you a table of how I'm stacking evidence based on published information. In previous video, I probably had 8 publications. This is how we're gonna get to 10 today. All right. So that's the take-home message. Now they did some bit of extra work as well, and it's that they presented in supplementary information that I found really interesting as well. So the first one, which I thought was very important, is that, and the good news in a way, is that they took the 10 people who showed the largest increase in their antibodies, in their IgG4 antibodies, and they measured all of their IgG4 antibodies. By the way, I should have mentioned this early on. All of these IgG4 antibodies that we're talking about thus far is against the spike protein, right? Basically the antigen with which that you're presenting with the vaccine, with the mRNA vaccine. Obviously, the mRNA vaccine brings the genetic information to our cells to produce the spike protein, which is the antigen that stimulates our immune system, right? So everything we've been talking about, they've been looking at IgG4 antibodies against the spike protein. But in these 10 individuals, they looked at total IgG4 antibodies against anything. So they didn't care about what these IgG4 antibodies target. They just wanted to measure what they are. And their conclusion is that there is no overall increase in IgG4. I don't know statistically there might not be, although I thought when they presented the data might be some statistical difference between the second and third shot, and you can see somewhat of a trend going upwards, but most of it indeed can remain flat. I find it curious as to why does it happen when you have increase against in IgG4 antibodies against say spike protein, but the total amounts remain the same. So what else does it decrease against in your body? It would be interesting to know. But why is this a good news? Is the reason why this is good news is because I've been telling you in previous videos that some of the worries against about this particular event, this increase in IgG4 antibodies, is in relation to what it might do in terms of surveillance against cancer. And the reason why is because IgG4 antibodies might prevent proper recognition of cancer development by IgG1 antibodies. So it's the change in ratio between IgG4 and IgG1 that we need to worry about, whether this might actually have an effect or not. So if the IgG4 levels remain constant, that's good, because that means we would not be potentially affecting this ratio between IgG1 and IgG4. And the reason why we don't want to affect that ratio is because the higher the ratio between IgG4 and IgG1, the greater the risk that we might be affecting proper cancer recognition by IgG1 cells, okay? I wonder if that's Saint Nick behind me. That might be. There is a Saint Nicholas mountain, my namesake. It's crooked, so I'm not sure if that's the one right behind me, but I hope so. And because it's a cool mountain. And so that's basically really good news, but we would need to see it corroborated with additional studies. But I really like that result, because obviously we don't want to encounter problems. I haven't presented this information on cancer in detail. We've produced a paper with a number of scientists, but we're just waiting for an online availability before I make a video. So stay tuned. But that's the reason why I was excited about this result. They also measured the levels of these IgG4 antibodies post vaccination, and the data they showed that these levels are extremely small after I think it was second shot, and then you see an increase in the IgG4 levels after third and fourth shot, and it only goes up to several percent, under 10% total of IgG4 of all of the subtypes. Now that seems low in comparison to some of the other studies I've been addressing and mentioning, because I even told you in the past that these IgG4 antibodies targeting spike protein can even become the main antibody targeting spike protein, versus in this data, that's not the case. That I'm talking about today, that's not the case. It didn't even reach 10% of total value after fourth vaccination. So what is going on? And the reason why is because in their study, they were only targeting receptor binding domain of the spike protein. So that's the very tip of the spike protein. If you look at the structure of the spike protein, it's on the very top, and that tip is involved in interacting with the ACE2 receptors on our human cells, and that's how virus gains entry into our cells. Now, in order to determine proper amounts, they should have also looked at IgG4 antibodies against spike protein itself anywhere. So not just receptor binding domain itself. Why is that? Why is that? In a previous video related to this topic on IgG4 antibodies, I told you that what might be happening is that we could be experiencing immune refocusing, steric immune refocusing. There is some evidence showing that indeed what's happening over time with these mRNA vaccines, what we are achieving is we are switching what the antibodies are targeting. So the antibodies are no longer targeting a receptor binding domain, but they could be targeting other areas of the spike protein, and we presented evidence against that. So this might be a reason why they're showing low amounts of IgG4 antibodies against receptor binding domain, because as these IgG4 antibodies are being formed with each vaccination, they might be switched to target other areas of the spike protein so that means receptor binding domain would be like a dominant target, and it goes to less dominant targets, meaning other areas of the spike protein. So future studies ideally should be looking at both receptor binding domain of the spike protein as well as all other areas of the spike protein as well. So that might explain why in this particular study, these levels are lower than what I've discussed before. Now, they also did other interesting work as well in their supplementary information. And as I mentioned, they had 370 individuals. Approximately 126 of those were those who had fourth shots of mRNA vaccine, and then the boosters. So third and fourth shot were either, like, as I mentioned, Pfizer or Moderna. They didn't separate them, unfortunately, which would be very valuable because there is some evidence suggesting that Moderna might be causing greater increase in IgG4 antibody development than Pfizer because of the increased amount of antigen as in comparison to Pfizer. So that would be another very valuable way of future studies if scientists were separating Moderna from Pfizer, so we can break this down. But they had out of those individuals who had fourth shots, 26 got breakthrough infections. Basically, they were infected with the virus. So they had 101 individuals in total who they had four shots and didn't have any infections. And that basically allowed them to see what happened in terms of infections, breakthrough infections, on the effect of these IgG4 antibodies. And remember, I reported previously that breakthrough infections in those who had the mRNA vaccine, the breakthrough infection, meaning if you get infected by the virus itself acts as if it was another vaccine booster for the production of these IgG4 antibodies, and they were able to show that data as well. They were separating that information in terms of those who got infected between 1 and 3 months after third shot or fourth shot, and those who got infected between 3 and 6 months after either third or fourth shot. And clearly, if individuals got infected, there was additional rise in those IgG4 antibody development. So this continues to corroborate that data. But because they had all of that information, what they were able to do is to look at the statistical information, whether IgG4 antibodies might increase the likelihood of breakthrough infection, and the answer was no. So that's also very positive news from this data. And basically, that's the summary of this particular paper. Very, very interesting, very, very large data. So now we have lots and lots of information showing these IgG4 antibodies. Looks like very real deal, because basically it looks that if you are mRNA vaccinated and you were not infected first, or you were not treated with immunosuppressive drugs, I should say, then very likely you will have IgG4 antibodies produced because of the mRNA vaccine. So the evidence, now with 10 papers, the evidence is quite strong, and there likely be more. But we still don't know what the clinical consequences of that. And the authors did mention, listen, we need to be observing this. And they also mentioned, not sure whether we should be now continuing with boosting until we understand this phenomenon better than what we understand right now. Why is it happening? They mentioned that very likely they believe it's because of the continuous presentation of antigen, in this case the spike protein, to the B cells in the germinal centers. So germinal centers are these areas within your lymphatic system where the antigen is basically presented to the immune system, to B cells, and determines what type of antibodies these B cells will be producing in the future. And they did mention that it has been observed before that post-vax mRNA vaccination, these germinal centers can persist for a long time, up to 6 months. So they're saying like, look, this is probably what's happening. You have these germinal centers, an antigen presentation for a very long time, longer time than anyone anticipated. And this is why you might force the immune system towards that class switch from IgG1 all the way to IgG4. So that's what they're suspecting. And we still have to understand what the clinical consequences of that are. We don't know this at this point. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope you enjoyed the spot. And again, thank you for all your support. Please like, please share. This is how we grow. Please leave a comment as well. YouTube also likes this, what you think, and so on. We try to answer a lot of these comments, but we can't get to all of them. No way, it's impossible. And thank you for. Please also check out our Patreon account as well. We put other content in there as well. And most importantly, please go outdoors as often, as much as you can. The reason why is because that's one of the ways you can also protect your health via enhancing your immune system. All right, that's all I have for you. See you next time. Bye, everyone.